Self-help books register themselves, from what I have perceived, as a purely American phenomenon. In my time in London, though I found plenty of chain bookstores, what I found in them was fiction, history, and biography. And when I went to Paris, what I saw was glorious. It was fiction, philosophy, and art. I think what makes self-help an obvious genre for America has likely been stated better by other writers, so I won't trouble you here. Equally, I think that even if you haven't read them, it doesn't take a stretch to give a theoretical reason why we have them. Americans are all about self-improvement. What is hilarious is that the ways we try to improve ourselves end up being yet another defense by us to keep us from confronting the darker truths about our pasts, our time as children, our oppressions, all the things we hold against ourselves unconsciously. So, self-help itself ends up becoming this bizarre symptom of American exceptionalism that becomes, when doled out in self-help, flimsy and desperate. The last self-help book I read before Hidden Potential was Drive by Daniel H. Pink in the year 2020. If you were to ask me the details about that book, I would be unable to recall a single word of it. The only reason I know about the book was thanks to my religious, logistical accounting of books read on Goodreads. Obviously, from the title and description alone, its ideas influenced the far more popular book by Angela Duckworth entitled Grit, published 7 years later in 2016. If you hang around in self-help for long enough, you start to see its incestuous nature. That's pretty much where I'd like to begin when talking about Hidden Potential. I know that Adam Grant, its author, is most well known for his book Givers and Takers, where he discusses the trend of successful leaders being those who gave more of themselves. He seems at least to be taking on the establishment from the inside out, though how successful he seems to be at throwing words at a behemoth like globalized power is not for me to say. I have not read Givers and Takers, but I read Hidden Potential, or listened to it on audiobook at 2 times speed, which I have only done once or twice before, and I must say that I enjoyed less of it than I wished. The book's central thesis is more or less advocating for thinking about process over product, which has been one of the central tenets in educational psychology for some time now. Moving in concentric circles out from core being to managing organizations, Adam Grant's larger goal is to get you to admire his verb choices. I'm kidding, but only a little, because it's all about the surface details here. Hidden Potential is, like all other self-help books, uninterested in existential questions that nag at us, like if we actually want to get better at our jobs, lest we take on more responsibility, or what particular part of our will convinced us to purchase the book in the first place, causing us to invoke Schopenhauer. Deep down, we know that greatness is made, but we also know that the world has gotten quite good at making diagnoses for all kinds of conditions, many of which have not existed for even 100 years, and as a result, we're told that we should take pills that may address the symptoms, but not the core issues. Think of Hidden Potential as another one of those pills, addressing a symptom and not the disease. I should say that I found some of it enjoyable. Much of the book felt like preaching to the choir. Young people should read for fun more? Yeah, no shit. People should climb mountains to feel inspiration? Well, sure, I'm no Gen Xer, but I've heard some people insist on that sort of thing. It turns out that a lot of leaders are chosen for their narcissistic impulses and have little to no meritocratic reason for being in any sort of leadership position. Buddy, you're speaking my language. Anybody who has spent any time in education can feel all the materials gained from these absurd studies and meta-studies coagulating together into a kind of production primer in Hidden Potential, laying out a roadmap for exactly the kinds of things that need to be done to provide a child with great opportunities from kindergarten on up. I mean, it's all here. Finland's educational system got mentioned. Again. If Grant did glance over some of the deeper realities of why that country does so well. Hint, hint. They don't treat their people like shit. The ideas of innocuous novices are taken up and used to success like it's some sort of great surprise, despite the fact that the curse of knowledge is a phrase we've tossed around for decades. I mean, it's not like any of this is deeply insightful or miraculous. Even learning styles of children, something debunked over and over now, is whispered by Adam Grant on the audiobook as some big revelation. If he had told John Adams that, to learn how to read, he need only listen to the trees before they became paper, he would have thrown you out like he did his disowned son, Charles. So what am I really critiquing here? Oh, I don't know. the triteness of it all? We should perhaps speculate here that Adam Grant's words make him a lot of money. The hidden potential of this book is its sales. I could write that phrase and call it a day, but maybe it's more than that. I have seen enough people in positions of power attempt to graft a lesson learned from a self-help book into their own system and have it be received by the employees down below with such cynicism that it reminds me of the dipped apple by the queen turned witch in Snow White. As for the really larger systems, Adam Grant thinks they can change too, which is a bit like asking Yanis Varoufakis to simply try again and harder. After he was finance minister to Greece in the 2010s, he wrote a scathing memoir entitled The Adults in the Room, where he basically learned that the leaders of the European Union were caught in a world of expedient and forced solutions to problems so large that freedom was impossible. On one level, these large bodies are organisms which are in constant fight or flight, and have little chance to address the science of this study or that. On the lower levels, we're not dealing with rationality or science. We're not dealing equanimity of ideas, discussion, and progress. You want to talk about curse of knowledge? Steven Pinker and Adam Grant should take a walk through some urban school districts sometime and ask themselves if anything happening there is even approaching rationality. The truth is that it is so far below that. These are places of ego, reactivity, repressions, and defenses, all the way down. As Thomas Pynchon wrote, there is no real direction here, neither lines of power nor cooperation. Decisions are never really made. At best, they manage to emerge from a chaos of peeves, whims, hallucinations, and all-around assholery. Close quote. You see what I mean? After reading a previous book on interlaced practice, I started practicing it in a high school classroom years ago. When I explained the power of something as simple as interlaced practice to my administrators, and how we as English teachers should not be having massive blocked units on just poetry, or just the 5-paragraph essay, I was basically told to shut the fuck up and to follow the curriculum I was given. Nobody cares, Adam. Let's go back to that young people should read more quote. Adam Grant is adamant about young people getting a chance to read independently, and should choose their own curriculum. In 2023, this comes off as so woefully out of touch, he might as well be writing in space. Has he not been aware that it is not only difficult to get students to read at all, it is difficult to get books in classrooms to begin with? Curriculums over the past couple of years have gotten more narrow, more forced, and more stringent than ever. Books are being banned left and right. Trust me when I say that writers long before Adam Grant were talking about the powerful force of reading for pleasure before 2013, fully a decade ago. But ever since that fateful year of 2013, when smartphones achieved saturation in the United States, SAT reading scores have been dropping. Even with the obvious points that Adam Grant makes, they are steeped in equally opposite and still no less obvious contexts for the absurdity of saying them so bald-facedly. It's not that we lost the war, Adam. We're fighting a totally different war entirely. So if there is hardly a theoretical basis for such a regurgitation of the latest research in pop psychology, what else could we critique it for? The little things that are left, I guess. Listening to the audiobook, I was stunned to find Adam Grant laughing at his own jokes. Many readers who are told to read audiobooks simply read the joke as it is written, regardless of if it is really hilarious. True to form, if you're listening to George Guidall perform Thomas Pynchon's Gravity's Rainbow, you're going to get some performance. But performance from a nonfiction self-help book? Without stating the obvious, which is that the jokes are not funny, the kind of lean-in this laughing does is to make me scared of the writer, in the way perhaps too that Batman's nemesis, the Joker, laughs. It's the kind of laugh that a housewife did in the 1950s when on speed, vacuuming the fuck out of some carpet. Why is he laughing here? He wrote the joke weeks, perhaps months ago. Knowing his writing and editing process, he's probably read and reread this joke often. He's not a comedian with a practiced rhythm. He's reading an audiobook. This to me is such a bizarre symptom of the idea that he's selling a version of himself, and a version of the world that people might eat up if they don't stop at each moment in this book to think through some of the things on offer. It is so much over-exuberant confidence that likely comes from repeated training and conditioning. Next, Are we really going to slog through hundreds of pages of hero-worshipping athletes? Are we really doing this? Climbers, baseball pitchers, basketball game changers, you name it. We cannot seem to get away from sports in the self-help genre as the most immediate, obvious, anecdotal evidence for how a system might work. I swear to God, I'm so tired of sports. You guys have got to stop it with the sports. What does all this sports talk have to say about the bizarre stories like Werner Herzog's The Great Ecstasy of Woodcarver Steiner from 1974? Sports is simultaneously bigger and smaller than Adam Grant can stipulate here, and its continued use in self-help is obvious and aggravating. Hidden Potential is the most self-help of titles that I ever heard. The question is if the book has anything outside of this moniker that transcends the genre and is noteworthy. If you have followed the education of Finland, or investigated the deliberate practice found in books like Peak by Anders Ericsson, or in the power of peer teaching found especially from peer reviews in the essay writing sphere in education, or in the interlaced practice found in anything from chess to baseball, then no. There is nothing new or noteworthy. What you are effectively paying Adam Grant to do is to do the research for you, which honestly was not that hard to begin with. What is so amazingly obvious is how Grant somehow weaves into this self-help book the methods for selling it to you. In one section of the novel, he reflexively talks about his writing process by hiring people, or volunteering them, to read sections and offer him blatant criticism. He recruits readers to constantly read his work so as to clean and prune his writing until it is razor sharp and laser fast, fully forgetting that this glossy edifice is one of the reasons why people seem to find a lot of reading like chewing on junk food. It is what in the video game industry us sweaty gamers like to call polishing a turd. But like I said earlier, right here he is patently telling you how he is getting this research to you. How do I spoon feed this to the reader, he thinks, with enthusiastic grifting at pleasure, and he is including it in the book. This is not a writer particularly poised to strike at an intended, small target audience. This sucker is primed to fire at everyone he can. The book jacket, the horrific metaphors, the thin reversals that reveal the wisdom to eye-watering effect. The whole thing is edutainment, and is likely to be instantly forgotten, save for some statistic that I read it on Goodreads. I feel like I'm going to piss off a lot of people with this kind of review. In America, who doesn't love a young and handsome and happily married and hardworking writer with great humility, showing us the way? Perhaps here I am simply transferring over what I learned from what I saw in Europe. Perhaps here is where we can find Freud's distaste for America. I've heard he called us over-civilized. He also called us anti-intellectual. I've never heard a better definition of self-help. Books like Hidden Potential are the equivalent of us swimming in an aquarium, chasing a goldfish who, eventually, forgot about us. Thanks for listening.